Welcome to this deck of Braids Arisen Nightmare, and as the name suggests of this card, Braids is now a nightmare, and before she wasn't. Braids was a dementia caster from the Cabal on Dominaria. This means that she could create or access a space where all beings that she killed came together with all of her worst nightmares. It's really cozy in there, that's all we know. She can use this space to trap others in them or to let some of her nightmares out, and that's how she fights the outside world. Eventually, she was trapped in her own dementia space after becoming crazy, like most dementia casters become eventually. Here she was ripped apart by her own minions over and over and over and over, all until she escaped when the Phyrexians came to Dominaria again. She's now a nightmare herself all of a sudden. I don't think this is all of a sudden, but she then lets the Weatherlight crew defeat her what she calls shard self. Now my theory is that her shard self was actually the sane Braids, and that the Nightmare Braid tricked the Weatherlight crew into killing her sane self, making the whole crew semi-useless in this invasion except for working for Nightmare Braids and resulting in her nightmare self now being the real Braids because there is no real Braids left. Let's see what this crazy story means in the form of a deck. So to the deck, here we have our commander Braids Arisen Nightmare, and the first thing that is really interesting about this commander is that she says at the beginning of your end step you may sacrifice and then you get to choose between an artifact, creature, enchantment, land or planeswalker. One of those. So you can build your deck around a lot of sacrifice strategies if you want, but otherwise the effect of course is here. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. So this is really a deck about giving your opponents choices, which means that Braids will in that matter not really be that competitive, but she can be a great way to get you a lot of value. And that is of course what you want to do. And how do you do that? You do that by forcing your opponent to not be able to sacrifice those types of permanents. So you could do that with planeswalkers. I actually tried that, but it didn't work that well in my opinion or experience at least. Lands is a great way. Almost no one wants to sacrifice a land because you can most of the time you can only play 1 a turn. Some people do want to sacrifice lands though, and that means that your strategy probably will not always work that well because just a black deck will not win from a green. From maybe a Gruul one or like a Golgari one, you won't win. So in some cases you will definitely lose. Something that this color is really good at is sacrificing creatures. So I have slotted in a lot of cards that are all about that. And usually what you want to do is to have cards that drain your opponents whenever one dies in these types of strategies, because we want to sacrifice them. So Bastion of Remembrance does this, Blood Artist does this. Okay, well there are more, but Sulaport Cutthroat does this. Then there are some that help us whenever we play one of our creatures, like a Yara or Bontus Monument. But this Monument is really good as well because it makes all of our cards cheaper almost. So that's really good too. I guess all of our colored cards. And then there are some that want us to sacrifice things because then we get tokens. The best ones are the ones where whenever you sacrifice one or whenever one dies, you get a token that also could give you money. Money would be great too, but mana is a good second best thing, I guess. Pitiless Plunderer does give you money in the form of treasure. But why? Because then you can keep comboing off and then you will probably win in 1 turn, which is what we want to do. Okay, so now we need to fill our board with a lot of tokens. Bitter Blossom is a good example. You get 1 every turn. You don't care a lot about losing life, for example. There are some in here that aren't as good. I noticed, like Flashback Marauder. It is really good if you have a commander that already benefits from sacrificing creatures, then this is really good. But our commander does sacrifice herself, but doesn't really benefit from sacrificed creatures, if you know what I mean. So if we play this and we sacrifice the Marauder, well, one thing that is good about that is that our opponents will have less creatures now as well, and they will need to make more choices. So we want to deprive our opponents of their creatures as well. So that is a good thing. That's why I put this in as well. But one thing that is holding this back is that it's not directly synergistic with our commander. It is only synergistic with some of the strategies in this deck. So I think this is the first type of card that we will get out. It is a shame because these are really cheap, money-wise. But there are more ways to create more creatures in here as well. Let's say, for example, this one, whenever one or more non-token creature dies, create a 2/2, so that could be an aristocrat as well, but I don't know. I thought this was more like a fodder thing. Another type of creature is the one that you can keep getting back, like reassembling skeleton. For 2 mana you can get it back to the battlefield. And I noticed that in most games you will have multiple ways of gaining mana from sacrificing your creatures, and that means that you will pretty easily go infinite with this card. So yeah, that is something that will happen, almost definitely will happen, and will definitely happen more when we get more of those types of cards. So I have to look for those, but with this deck already you will have a lot of moments where you combo off into infinity with, also for example, Sifter of Skulls does the same thing, where you get a 1/1 that you can sacrifice to make colorless mana. The only thing that you do need is the black mana. So we often have a lot of that, but for now I think the only way to do that is Pitiless Plunderer, and that is a costly card. So if you don't care about the going infinite, you don't really need that, but that's why I really like this card. And we can get them because yeah, we have some of those cards where you can look for the card that you need, like Witchclaw Talisman or Scheming Symmetry, and we don't mind giving our opponents some answers as well, as long as their mana is stepped out. We don't really mind that much. But you will have those combos in this color pretty easily. I also have put in some weird kind of board wipes. Well, Mutilate and Massacre Worms are pretty straightforward, but for example, make an example. Lets your opponents choose 2 piles, and you get to choose which pile they have to sacrifice. But why do I like this so much? It's because it is a sacrifice effect, and some of our cards really like our opponents to sacrifice things. So I really like these types of board wipes. Killing Wave is the same. Fraying Omnipotence is a really good one for that. It also targets you and you lose a lot of life as well, and stuff, but you don't mind as much as your opponents do, probably, hopefully. One thing that's really interesting is Living Death, because we will be able to put all of our creatures into the graveyard at instant speed, and not all of our opponents will have that ability. And then everyone swaps their graveyard with their battlefield, and we are way better off. Now, how can we do that, you ask? I hear you asking this. That might be weird. You might have just said that and I heard it. That's weird, I know. But it's because there are a lot of creatures in this color that enable you to sacrifice a creature at instant speed at any time of the moment, as long as they are on the battlefield. So the moment your opponents see you sacrifice your whole board, let's say, they know that something is coming, but hopefully you played your game well, and it is too late for them. God Eternal Bantu isn't that instant speed, but it is a good way to sacrifice your whole board as well. 4 or 5 mana. You can sacrifice your whole board and you draw that many cards as well, which I like. So you probably will have your whole deck in your hand at that moment. There are more ways to draw a lot of stuff. A lot of our tokens have just 1 toughness, so Skull Clamp really works well with that. Then there are more ways like Bolas' Citadel, which is a really good card to get through all of your deck, especially when your cards are pretty cheap. That is why I don't have that many high mana cards. I have some with 5, there are a lot of those. Then really some with 6, not too many though, and some with 4. But we try to ramp out pretty quickly with some lean and mean mana stones, and for example Crick, which moves away all of those black or all the colored mana, and you can pay 2 life instead. So that is another way to get rid of the color restriction. But otherwise these other cards give you a lot of mana as well. One thing I really like is Black Market. Whenever a creature dies, you put a charge counter on it, and you will have a lot of creatures die on the battlefield. And then you add a mana for each charge counter on Black Market at the beginning of pre-combat main phase. So that is really good for your faster spells, let's say. So yeah, a lot of those effects. Then I like redundancy in my decks. Some cards that really change the angle, because I notice in these types of synergistic decks that your opponents will look for ways to shut down your whole strategy, and if they can do that, they will. So it's nice to have some different ways to finish out a game, like Grey Merchant of Asphodel Gary is a way to have a lot of black pips on your battlefield and then drain your opponents for a lot. Or for example Turgid, where you make your opponents sacrifice a lot, of course, and when they do, you get those cards back for yourself. So that is one way to annoy your opponents and also to win. Then I looked for ways that we can double our commander's effect, like Strionic Resonator, or for example Hammerhead's Archive, which only doubles the draw, but Strionic Resonator doubles the whole effect. So this really changes your opponent's strategy, or at least what the strategy should be. We have a Crucible of Worlds here as well. Why? Because sometimes we will want to force our opponents to let us draw, and a good way to do that is by sacrificing a land and then returning that to the battlefield. But we do want to return them because we don't want to lose our lands. So Crucible of Worlds is a good way to do that. Then I have some murder effects. I don't often like these, so I don't have a lot of them in the deck. But I might want to lose Soul Shatter, I think. But this has been a good one whenever I have those sacrifice synergies out. But otherwise I might just drop some of these murder effects. I don't think all of them are needed. Like 2 or 3 are usually okay, but sometimes you just want to drop one specific creature. I have Braids Frightful Return in this deck, just because it is flavorful. Actually, it is not such a good card, but it does have some sacrifice and synergies again, and it has a mini Braids effect at the end, and also you get 1 card back into your hand from your graveyard, so that's a little bit of value anyways. Then some other ways to return cards and stuff like that, and that is always flavorful because you want to return the nightmares to the battlefield, and you want to scare your opponents. So yeah, that was it for this deck. I will upgrade this with some things like removing Flashback Marauder effects and dropping some murders maybe. And what I want to put in is more ways to synergize with the sacrificing, I think. Yeah, and we're comboing off up to this point, so if we are a combo deck, we will want some more like real control. So we will be looking for that as well, instead of just murder. Like maybe we want some specific control cards, like maybe not a murder, maybe something that can target enchantments like Feeder Swarm or something. Yeah, we'll show you my progress as well, but I will drop the list so you can see the updated list at all times. And of course, please give me subjects. Give me subjects on the deck. No, give me feedback on the deck if you have that. And look through it and see if you find some inspiration for your own Braids deck. And if you have one, also send me the list, because I strive to improve my decks over time still. Aside from that, have a nice day. Bye.